should be more. All right, welcome back, everybody. I hope you enjoyed our fish and inverts morning. Now I'm going to hand things over to Breck McCollum, who's going to be presenting algae to us. So first, let me screen share her algae talk. Great. So, wait for the spinning wheel of death to stop. I don't know. Ah, there we go. There we go. All right. Take it away, Brecky.
Okay. I'm going to say deny. Wait, do we need this, Jared?
Weird. I'd say yes.
Yes.
Yes is not an option.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Does it look like it's going?
Wait, sure. Yeah.
Because my light isn't on anymore.
Oh, yeah. And yeah, it's on.
Okay, cool. So I recently went to the Menthe Sia exhibit at the MFA, and he was a big fan of algae, so some of his work is peppered throughout this talk. All right, so this is the actual one that I saw there called Algae. He did some neat cutouts and kind of became famous for that in the early 19th century, 20th century. So we're going to start with reds, which are the hardest, get those out of the way, and then move on to kelps and greens. So let me orient you to how these pages are going to be set up. So in the upper corner, we're going to have the sheet that you can find these on. It may not be fully up to date, but most of these are going to be on UPC, and some of the kelp will show up on SWAP and Quad. And we're going to have the scientific name on the top, followed by the code, and then the common name. So we're going to start out with Menthe Sia, which their code is AHPL. And this one's pretty easy to distinguish from other things out there. It's this scraggly, super dark red. And it has irregular branching, which is going to be a common feature of a couple of these, but it's wiry and dark and pretty easy to distinguish. Sometimes it can be kind of bleached on the ends, especially later on in the year, and it's generally pretty shallow. It can also be growing as an epiphyte or in sort of a sandy habitat. Also, feel free to interrupt me, especially if you know things about algae. I don't claim to be an expert on any of this. Next up, we have one of my favorites, Bonamasonia. This is boha, or the hookweed. This one has super characteristic hooks on it. Pretty easy to distinguish because of these guys here. It is pretty two-dimensional. It's kind of flattened and feathery, and often this lovely bright red color, which is an easy distinguishing feature of it. Next up, we have Rhenium. This one is known for having these little pincher-like tips on it. It's also corticated, meaning it has this banding pattern throughout. Sometimes it can be really fluffy and hard to distinguish from some of the other ones. So if you see something like this, take a second and look closer for those pinchers and the banding. And the tips are also bifurcated, which just means that they have a V-shaped split at the end. And this is CRSP, the banded weed. Next up, we have Chondrus. This one is pretty common throughout the area, but it can be kind of tricky sometimes because you might see it as this bleached out version. Same species as the typical bushy red that we have. It's got a fan-like pattern with lobes at the end. and a flat blade on the ends. CHCR, probably one of the most common ones that we'll see out there. Next up is a really easy one. This is our Erect Garland. Pretty easy to distinguish because it's calcified, so it's a little bit crunchy. It's got these neat little geniculum, the joints that give it some flexibility. That is just CO. We don't even bother with a 4-part name. Okay, next up we have coder. This one is can be confused with chondrus if you get a really ratty looking chondrus. But one of the distinguishing features here is that we have these cylindrical stems going out to the blades. And the blades are a bit broader than you would see on a chondrus. Let's see, what do I want to say about that? I guess if you're not sure if this is chondrus or coder, follow the base of the blade down and see what kind of structure you have at the bottom of the blade. This one isn't as fan-like as chondrus is. You can see how this one kind of splays out, and coder doesn't do the same thing. Yep. Okay, next we have cystoclonium. SIPU is what we call it in the Burns lab. This one is pretty easy to distinguish because of this really cylindrical blade. These are pretty thick and kind of rubbery. These guys have alternate branches, which is a really easy to distinguish characteristic on these because they, the branches, instead of meeting at the same area, they're staggered a little bit. Let's see, but we have 2 different morphs here. We have the cylindrical form that has short branchlets. I think if you look at your UPC sheet, it says branches with branchlets, which drives me a little bit crazy. This is the one that one's referring to. So branches that taper into smaller branchlets. But you can also have this morph that has kind of curly, thinner, more tapered branchlets at the end. And so look for the cylindrical branches and that alternating branch pattern. So that's SIPU.
So do you guys have gracilaria? I don't think gracilaria is
I believe so, yeah. I think
You're going to have a really hard time telling the one without tendrils from a gracilaria.
Yeah.
You have to do that for cross section.
Do you find gracilaria subtitled? Or is it my question was common?
So I mean, it's not as common, and the cystoclonium can be thinner, but if you don't have the tendrils, you almost always have to cross section.
Well, shit.
Yeah.
No. I mean, you're not wrong. I think if we went into this, my impression was that gracilaria was more of a tidal species, so we weren't worrying about that. But I'm willing to admit that you're wrong here.
Yeah, I don't see as much of it super deep, so you can have super deep side, but it's certainly subtitled.
How if you do section it, is it easy enough to tell?
Yeah, so the difference between the two in cross-sectioning is what's in the medulla. So like the medullary cells in the middle.
Oh.
So gracilaria has like big fat bubble cells, and cystoclonium is filamentous.
Oh,
So
okay.
it has very distinctive.
So we could always pull some up if you do see it and you're not certain. That's easy enough to do.
Yeah, I guess it's just a good caveat.
Yeah.
If it's, I mean, the tendrils, you can be sure that's gracilaria does not.
Okay. But I feel like we see it most commonly in the non-tendril form anyways. Okay. These are definitely going to be tricky, so go with your gut is generally our kind of motto for the algae. Next up we have Menthe Sia, or Duco. This one is really easy to distinguish from other ones. It's got this hollow, kind of empty tubing, looks like sausage casing. These are flat cylinders. It can get pretty tall, but they tend to come off of just one common base instead of being branching like some of the other forms. It looks brown, but it's still a red, I believe. Yep, that one's easy. Duco. We don't see a ton of it out there, but every once in a while. One of my favorites is Euchre, or Euthora cristata. This has a really pretty lacy structure to it. It tends to be this bright red. This is a pretty good example of it. It has fractal ends. If you are a Jackson Pollock fan, you might know what that is. But the ends tend to branch off kind of mathematically. So Euchre, the delicate northern sea fan. Here we have wider blades than Telota, but I think you'll see when we get to Telota that they don't look very similar at all. Well, next we have the worst. This is Daisy Siphonia japonica. This stuff, if you've dove in our lab, you know how much we love it. So this has several different forms. It can either be this lovely red, kind of fluffy, or it can be this sort of nasty, disintegrating brown cloud. It's not super easy to distinguish from the other Siphonia, which is Polysiphonia, especially when you see it at its best, like this, where you have clear kind of branching. This you'll get to know really well out there. I think the best way to explain it is to compare it to some of the other things that look like it. We have listed on here this thing called the pull test, which just means that it's pretty fragile. And so if you tug at it, it'll come apart in your hands easier than some of the other ones.
Yes, this is something that Chris Newton introduced to us. So she basically said the two polys that she used in the field, although she was even a little bit wary of the 100% efficacy of this, is that brightness. And really when you pull on them, Dasyphonia tends to pull apart more at the tips from the branches, like it just falls apart. Whereas Polysiphonia, when you pull on it, will come up from the whole faster further down the valves. Feel free to disagree with me on this, but that's sort of been our experience. There's a real difference in terms of structure.
Yeah, I mean, so the distinguishing characteristic of this seaweed is that it has a polysiphonous main branch only. So, like if you see
Daisy does or Poly does?
Daisy. So poly is all polysiphonous, the whole plant.
Mm-hmm.
But this Daisy Siphonia only has a polysiphonous main branch,
Cool.
and the other ones are unitheriate. So that's why it's more delicate.
Okay.
So if you can see like a thicker main axis
This
there
here, yeah.
in the field, right? That's a good characteristic.
Oh, okay.
Because if you look at under a scope, it's polysiphonous, but when it branches out, it's not. It's unitheriate.
Cool. I think our next slide is comparing the siphonias. Nope, okay. This is what we see a lot of out there, which is gross. Super fun to do your Yuki season also. Okay, so yesterday we mentioned that when a name changes, we'll often just leave the code as its old code just to keep whoever's doing the data entry more sane.
Yeah, I mean, I think now that I've gone through and processed all of our different data sets once, we could change it to DJ, and it's actually not a terrible change. I think given where we are in the game, let's keep it as HJ, and if that ends up being confusing, maybe we'll change it next year.
Yeah, for this year, let's keep names the same. I'm in favor of doing it the right way, but
I don't think the change will actually not be as hellish as I thought it was.
Okay.
I was going through it last night because at first I thought it would require a lot of rewriting of stuff at once, like 2 months.
Yeah.
But for now, let's keep it HJ.
Cool. Oh, I don't have that slide. I wanted, let me just, okay, that's coming up. In a little bit, I'll have a couple of different Siphonias together that we can compare at the same time. Next up, let's move on to Mastocarpus, or mast. This guy also looks a little bit like chondrus. I'm from the West Coast, so I'm not as familiar with chondrus as you guys all are, so everything kind of looks like chondrus to me, but this has much more tapered blades than chondrus does, unless you get this really lovely giant blade form. So this stuff is pretty shallow generally, but when it's this large blade, it's got a really rough surface. It's actually a good exfoliator. Let's see, so it can have bumps. It has the central main branches that kind of exponentially branch from. Let's see, the main branch does have these kind of wider triangle-shaped midpoints to it.
Is the blade morphology a function of environment? Like, do you tend to see that wider blade in like lower flow environments?
That's what I would guess. I don't know for certain, but that is a common thing with algae.
I see a lot of that kind of Mastocarpus around. They have a lot more species on the West Coast. Like usually they're very small and it's very rough on the top, and you can tell right away it's not.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay.
Palmaria, this is the one that they told us tastes like bacon. Isaac and I can verify that our one out here doesn't really.
Not so much. It's a poor man's bacon.
We just pulled it up off the bottom and ate it. It's not great. So disappointing, but easy to identify.
Worse than that all.
Yeah. So you might get this one confused with Porphyra if you're not paying close attention, but it's much thicker. Porphyra is only one cell, and this is multiple cells thick. But this is Papa, also known as Dulce.
So the other thing that you could confuse this with is Granulopeia. Granulopeia turritura, which is an introduced, largest red algae in the world.
Oh.
Introduced, it's very common in Rhode Island. You guys definitely have it in the Gulf of Maine. And very close to
Yeah.
Palmaria.
Could you email us and we'll look it up and
Yeah,
see
I
if
think
we'll
I
add
put
it?
it on our list last year. We have a lot.
Yeah, you have,
The difference is really like they look the same.
Mhm.
You'd have to do a cross section for
Yeah.
100%. But the difference is that Granulopeia is like slimy.
Okay.
If you touch it, it's like very slippery.
Can you tell underwater
Yeah, if you touch it. I mean,
with the glove on though?
maybe not the one.
Okay.
is it Granulopeia turritura?
Sure.
Okay, so that's also so.
Yeah, and it's all in Rhode Island. We don't have
Ah, interesting.
Yeah, so Palmaria, actually that doesn't surprise me because last summer was hot
Yeah,
and all of our Palmaria died.
and
It's
it's
more
more
of a
water.
party.
Maybe we ate the other one and that one doesn't taste like bacon.
You touch it with your hand, and not with the glove. It's definitely slimy.
Right? Maybe you'd be like, you don't want to stick that in your mouth. Okay.
But yeah, it definitely looks similar. Sometimes the Granulopeia does a single blade, but it can also branch like that.
So basically it's slimy Papa in warmer water.
Granulopeia?
Yeah.
It's in the Gulf.
Yeah, right. What I'm saying is it's a slimy Papa first off, is sort of maybe that first. Yeah, we'll leave it at that. Because it'll change.
Yeah, and you guys are definitely probably encountering that Granulopeia. You just
Okay.
didn't know that.
Okay. Keep an eye out.
Yeah.
And this is another one of my favorites. None of these photos do it justice. It's really pretty underwater. This one's easy to tell because it has a distinct midrib that goes throughout the blade, kind of like this bleached out one here. It does look oak-like. Yep, really cool. Hard to mistake for anything else. Peru, we get excited when we see that one. I do anyway. Next, we have the other Siphonia that we see on occasion. This one does look in the water quite a bit like the fluffy, kind of disintegrating version of HJ. So it does tend to be a little bit more, I'm going to say regularly filamentous instead of the super branching one. The other one looks almost like it branches at random, where this is pretty regularly branching. Hardier than Daisy Siphonia. So like Jared said, if you're lucky and you do the tuft test, you might pull the whole thing out instead of just breaking off the tips. Lucky for all of us, there's a variety of colors and morphologies. So try hard, I guess, with this. But
Probably lumping is,
Yeah, I don't think that's what happened.
so here we have a trio of Siphonia. I went up to University of New Hampshire with Chris Wells and Jen Dykstra, and we cross-sectioned and tried our best to figure out some better distinguishing features for these. So under microscope here, we have all three of them. And does anyone feel like being brave and guessing which is which?
The top one is the pinch one, right?
Well, these are all Siphonias.
So, oh, so that's not Saccharina.
So your options are
Yeah, so this
poly?
one is corrugated too. So
Yeah.
that's not, like, so each Rhenium is also, has lines.
Yeah, and this is a thing that we haven't noticed. So the top one is poly, and we haven't noticed before the cortication on it. So that's a thing that, I mean, I would trust Chris Wells' ID over mine any day. So he said that that is poly, and so that's the thing that I kind of want to look at. But it does almost look like there are pinchers on there, but I am not good enough of a phycologist to argue.
It's less.
Yeah, okay, you feel good about that? So the next one is Daisy Siphonia, or HJ. So pretty similar in structure, but a little bit rattier. It doesn't have that regular branching of poly, and it tends to be a little bit, I don't know, fluffier, I guess.
I like how you can see that the structure that you mentioned before, that it's really only polycyclic to get towards the tips.
Yeah, so it's on the main axis is polycyclus, and then it changes to uniseries.
Yeah.
Yeah, in Daisy.
And Daisy, yeah, okay. Yeah, you can see this right here is pretty regular, and then it fragments more at the end. Is what you're saying. And then just because there's a third one that we don't really see much of. This is more northern than us. Neosiphonia, scraggly, darker. Don't worry about it for now.
Yeah, because our polyps is plus you.
Yep. Okay. Next up, we have goat tang. I don't know what that comes from. But this one is Palides rotundus, or poro. This one has, it's pretty dark red, almost looks brown also, but it's easy to distinguish from Menthe Sia, the very first one we saw, because it's short and squat, and pretty regular branching, bifurcating, if you want to use your phycology words. And it often grows in a soft sediment like a cobble, rubble, sand. That one's pretty easy to distinguish. I don't think we see a ton of it out here.
It's moderately common.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like super common, but we'll definitely, I definitely counted it many times. I would really like it.
Yeah.
It's got a cool texture.
Yeah, it's got a little bit more of a robust structure to it than some of the other ones. Okay, Porphyra. This is super thin. It's the one that I said is just a single sheet. Also tasty. I have a little note at the bottom to ask Jarrett or I about Kathy Drew Baker. There's a really cool story there about one of the coolest lady phycologists in general of all time. We call it red ulva because it looks exactly like that green single cell ulva, but it's red.
So the subtitle versions of Porphyra that you would probably be seeing are actually Wilkmania, but there are 2 cell layers there.
Ah, okay.
Because most of the Porphyras are interset, or the shallow.
Yeah.
You get the big kind of big blades of porphyry, especially in summer and Gulf of May.
Yep.
Those are Wilmania. It's Wilmania with the W. So porphyry used to be porphyry, now it's like. Yeah. Wildmania. W like wild, E, A.
Some more exciting names.
So they're they're 2 centimeters thick, but those are the subtitle ones that you're gonna see.
Yeah, we're not really gonna be able to tell them apart, so.
No, but they don't really look like that. They're like very deep red.
Oh, okay.
Yes. Yeah, the ones we see up there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Huh. Alright. Yeah, I think that is going to be a lump, but we'll say that it's.
Yeah. Just for psychological.
Yep. Next up, we have Telota serrata, which is on my flash drive, I noticed. So this one is cool. Looks like a little red fern. Pretty easy to distinguish because you have the symmetrical branching, which is not super common for the things that we've gone over so far, where there's a branch on either side, they're symmetrical. And like a fern, they taper towards the tip and get wider towards the base or the stipe. These guys have flat branches. They look a little bit like the Ceramium, the hook one that we saw earlier, but not really. They definitely don't have those hooks. This one is real distinct if you see it out there. Telota, so PTSE, the northern sea fern. Next we have Spree. This guy, once in a while I get it confused with HJ, but it tends to kind of keep to itself a little bit more than HJ, which will be everywhere. There are these little, mostly regular, super short-haired tufts. It's an epiphyte, so you'll see it on other things generally instead of just growing out of the ground. But it's very short, short in length. So, yeah. It's kind of like a little red moss, kind of little fluffy moss tuft. All right, that's the worst of the filamentous reds anyway. I want to just say that if you have no idea what you're looking at, we do have these unknown categories. So unidentified red blade, unidentified filamentous, and red algal turf. But at least on our UPC sheet, we have pretty good descriptions. If you squint and look really closely on the sides there. And just in case this feels a little bit overwhelming, we don't see most of these regularly. And so feel free to write down what you think it is and then come back up on the boat and ask other people. I will often stuff it into the edge of my glove and bring it back up so we can look at it. So,
yeah, it's definitely one of those things that argues for bringing your ID book on the boat.
Yeah.
You will need it.
Yep.
Maybe we should purchase ID books and just leave them.
We have our own. We just printed out on our paper.
Yep.
Actually, we probably need to go through an update a little bit, but maybe have you focus still.
Yeah, no problem. What is next? Okay, the encrustings. So we have a few more. First up, we want to talk about Hildebrandia or Hiru. This one's really easy. It's the non-pink red crust that you'll see out there. It's generally, this is a little bit darker than I meant for it to come out as, but it'll be the dark rock crust that you see out there. It's not generally this bright. It's the maroon one, so also non-calcified. I see a ton of this. Next up, we have these little Titanoderma. It's a little epiphyte. You'll see it growing on a lot of the stipes of the kelps that we see out there. Easy to mix up, probably most often with some of the other kelp epiphytes, the bryozoans. I don't see a ton of this, though. Okay, so I have mostly been going in alphabetical order on your UPC sheets, but I'm going to talk about the coral and algae crusts that I think are most common first, because these are the ones that I want you guys to really commit to memory. So first up, we have lithothamnium, or Algae. This is the easiest of them to identify because it's super lumpy. You can almost safely say that any lumpy one that you see here in the Gulf of Maine is going to be this guy. This is a really great picture of what I see it as the most out there, where it's super lumpy, but it has some sort of smooth edges. So this is the easiest one.
In the upper left there, of that upper right, is that still it, or is that another?
Nope,
algae?
that's another one.
Okay.
We'll get to that one soon. So notice the differences. I'm too short for this. But
Sorry.
this one up here and the lumpy one down here. Anyone have any guesses of what the non-lumpy one is? Okay, we'll get there.
Is it lithophil? Or leptophil?
I don't think so. What about the dark one? Do you guys remember what the dark one is? Peru. Okay, next up we have Filamentous. This one is the one that you might confuse with Algae. On the lumpiness scale, it's kind of the intermediate one. This one is not nearly as lumpy, but it does have some small rugosities. And it'll often have visible white reproductive structures called the conceptacles. So I think once you see some of the other ones, we'll go back and I'll show you this one again so you can feel more comfortable with it. It'll often have that white edge, but not always. So this one's kind of difficult. So if you see one that's somewhat lumpy, but not as lumpy, you don't feel comfortable saying it's Algae, it's probably this one. Filamentous, PHSP. So next up we have Clathromorphum, and that's the one.
That was the one.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
'Cause it's thicker.
Yep, it's thicker. It tends to be very smooth, but not as deceptively smooth as that picture in the far, I guess, right. It can have little white crescents on its surface, but it's generally pretty smooth. And so you can kind of see it compared to this Algae here. They are quite different. This one, what I've been told is that at least until recently, it was mostly only above about 15 feet. I think that it's been moving down because I see it a lot on our deep walls. So this one might be taking over a little bit more now that it's warming here. Yep.
So the bottom left part of this one would be the that look like.
Yep,
Right?
Algae, and maybe some Peru in here.
Okay.
But all of this stuff up here, I feel pretty comfortable saying that that's all Clathromorphum or CLSP.
Can you go back to the one that was before this real quick?
Yeah. Yeah, so they're a little bit different. The one thing I want to say is that, I mean, color's not a great thing to go by, but this one tends to be a little bit more of a vibrant pink than the Clathromorphum is. Clathromorphum is kind of a dusty pink, maybe. Yeah, these are hard, but. Okay, so this is a thing I pulled out of some unpublished notes I was given that compares lithothamnium, Filamentous, and Clathromorphum. These are the 3 species that Ken Seaben said are most common in the Gulf of Maine. This is from probably about the 80s, so things might be changing, but this is an interesting thing to keep in mind here. Who is overgrowing whom in this situation? So Clathromorphum tends to be the best competitor, at least it was earlier. These things have been known to switch. So that overgrows lithothamnium, which overgrows the Filamentous. And so sometimes you'll see all three of them meeting together, and you can kind of look for the growing edge, who's on top of who. Yep, I think that's, so these are the three that I feel, you know, moderately confident in saying are the ones that we'll encounter most out there. So we do have a few others though. We have this lithophyllum, which there are not great pictures of online. We're not, I mean, I think the one on the right is from Europe, but my best way to describe these is that they have this slightly raised margin, and they tend to be kind of loady. I didn't know if that was a word, but you understand what I mean. Like they rather than these guys that kind of all grow together, it tends to, I don't know, maybe it tends to stick to itself. I don't feel super confident in this one. So keep an eye out for this. I don't feel like we see a ton of it. If you do see it, try to get a good photo of it and send it to us, because we are just going off of Google image searches at this point. Yep, I feel like it shows, I feel like I have written this Lisp acronym down more frequently maybe than I should have in the past. I think that, yeah, what I mean by Lisp is probably that thiamatolithon. So keep an eye out for these. If you see an encrusting red that you're uncertain with and you have a camera, take a picture, and I'd love to help you figure that out.
Yeah, the raised margin is good. I've seen it a few handful of times and always kind of forget about it.
Yeah.
The raised margin, you see it.
Cool. Next up, we have Leptophytum. And this guy you might confuse with Clathramorphum, but I feel like this is a really good image of it. It tends to be super thin as far as the encrusting corallines go. And what I mean by uniform surface isn't that it's perfectly smooth, but that the little bumps, the conceptacles, tend to be pretty regularly distributed throughout its self. Let's see, this might be a little bit of Clathramorphum mixed in here just to confuse you, but this thin stuff here is all what I mean by the Leptophytum. So basically think of it as a super thin Clathramorphum. Well, less. All right, that's it for the hard stuff. We have kelps and greens coming up next. So back to the Matisse exhibit that I was talking about. I found this the other day, which I feel like is a great example of what Keen is. On the right, we have the people who are doing the quads, and they're having a great time. And on the left here, we have the poor schmucks doing the UPC, which is sometimes fun.
Sometimes.
So this is actually a piece that was inspired by Matisse. It's not an actual Matisse, but he went on this phase of doing these cutouts, like I mentioned, and so this was a take your kids to see the Matisse exhibit and then cut out shapes and have them play with shapes. So, but I feel like it explains Keen pretty well also. All right, next up we have kelp, which is pretty easy. I think we'll kind of power through this one. So first up we have Saccharina, the thing that you'll see on every single dive. This guy, someone double check me on the sheets that you identify this one on, but I think it's all of them. So.
Yeah, the only one we don't do it in swap. We don't do it in.
Okay, yeah. So with these guys, you'll do it in quad UPC and obviously in your kelp surveys. So what I meant to mention yesterday is it makes our lives easier if you get one of these cloth tapes to do your kelp morphology measurements on the boat or on the shore afterwards, because you can just roll it up, stuff in a pocket, shove it somewhere on your boat. And it makes life easier for doing the kelp measurements. I also really want to sew it onto my glove. I think that would be awesome, but
Last year Ted had the in a Ziploc baggie and then took one of those, what are they called, so clippy things?
Carabiner?
And he, yeah, carabiner, and he like clipped that through the Ziploc, and so we kind of just kept taking there. And
Cool. Yeah, those things are great. So this one doesn't have the structure of a midrib. You might see that there's an area that doesn't have this kind of rippling pattern on it. That's basically where the midrib would be. This one looks like lasagna a lot of the times. You can tell we're hungry when we put all these names together. Sugar lasagna. So the one thing I do want to point out here is that if you find an individual that's less than 20 centimeters, we throw a J on the end of the species code there. So it becomes SLJ, which definitely tests out my dyslexia underwater doing the J and the L. So it's SL if it's an adult or SLJ if it's a juvenile. And we've seen some that are longer than we are underwater. These guys get huge. They can also be pretty heavily epiphytized, so they're everywhere. Next up we have agarum, which is very easy to distinguish. It looks kind of like Swiss cheese in comparison. It does have this midrib, tons of holes. Once again, we add a J to the species name if it's a juvenile or under 5 centimeters. These guys out here don't get huge, but they tend to be pretty small and stout. Once again, we measure these guys in quads, or count them anyway in quads UPC and in the kelp morphology pages. Next up, we have Laminaria digitata, finger kelp. This one's easy to distinguish because it has these split blades. Yep, this one's easy. It tends to be very flat. There's no midrib in these guys. We see these pretty commonly. And once again, we add a J to the juvenile name if it's less than 10 centimeters. All right, next up we have Alaria ales. That's a great name. This one does have the obvious midrib. So if you see a midrib, it's probably this one. It can be pretty epiphytized also, but doesn't have holes like the garum does. Long and narrow and not always a single blade.
It's usually in the most wave exposed of habitats, so it's not super common in all the places we end up surveying. We'll see it.
Like some water motion.
Yeah, that's a lot of
Okay. All right, next up we have Sakurai. This one's exciting when you see it because it's different from all the other ones. You might mix it up with Saccharina at first glance because it does just have a single blade with no midrib. It can be pretty epiphytized, but it itself has little hairy structures sort of on it, so it looks a bit fuzzy. We also don't have a great picture of this one, so we should add that to our list of things to do this year. Grab a better picture. I think we see it most at shoals, right? Yeah. Not super common. And juveniles are individuals that are less than 10 centimeters.
The biggest giveaway of this, you can look at the blade all you want, but in the end, if you look at the stipe, it is a rectangular stipe instead of a round stipe. That's, it can look very similar to Saccharina under some conditions, but if you look at it and you're like, hey, that stipe is flat, rectangular, it's not, versus the nice rounded and cylindrical, that's it. That's the sort of big giveaway.
Cool. I'll add that to this talk for next year, but Jared said a square or rectangular stipe.
Yeah, it's like a flat stipe.
Flat, okay. All right, and then just like with the reds, we have unidentified. You'll You'll probably encounter these in quads where they're little juveniles that are not big enough to ID the species. I think if it's greater than 10 centimeters, you should try harder and get it to species, but less than that, they're pretty challenging. I'll give you that. Okay, that's blade, BLD. All right, and then there are just a few non-kelp browns that we want to cover. This first one, RV, Anthrocladia villosa. You have what looks like a midrib, this big flat stick that goes down the center, and then symmetrical sort of tubular branches coming off of it. So once again, look at the symmetry of the branches. This one looks different. But it might just be, these might be zoomed in a little bit more. I feel like we see it looking like this on occasion out there, more so than the super thin version. That might just be a difference, a type that could be out there. Either way, you have a pretty distinct branch and little sharp fuzzy hairs coming off of it. So look for that symmetrical branching. That's generally your best characteristic for a lot of algae. Next up, we have Cordyphyllum, which is pretty cool. These guys get tall. We see them maybe once a year, and we're all pretty psyched about it. But it's a tall rope-like structure. It's not super fuzzy compared to one of the next ones coming up, but no branches. So this is a pretty easy one. CHFI, cordweed.
That one I feel like used to be common at shoals.
There are a couple of patches at shoals of Corda. So like in Malaga, there's a big bed of it, and there are a couple of places that, as far as I can tell, it stayed constant in those for decades. It's like the Corda spots.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I feel like we
Cool.
see it in sort of softer sediment, kind of cobbly areas.
Yeah, it's usually a little more cobbly. It's a little more shallow
Yeah.
usually too. So we'll run into it sometimes if like when we're trying to put up over something.
Yep.
But it's you can look at the sort of old maps of dominant subtidal algae from the early 90s, and like the Corda spot is the same as the Corda spot is now.
Cool.
Oh, pretty cool.
Yeah.
All right, so this one is the fuzzy one.
It is on swap. But
Okay. So I don't feel like this one gets very tall, but it is a non-branching, fuzzy brown, sort of like CHFI, but
it can get tall, so it's actually the most likely thing the difficult thing is sometimes to tell this apart from Corda. And it's that fuzziness that's key. Because Corda can sometimes have like some crap on it.
Yeah.
Like this. There are a couple of places, like on Devil's Dance floor at Shoals, we actually see a lot of this.
okay.
Quite large. See other places as well.
But this is almost fern-like in its fuzziness, so pretty
Yeah,
distinct
it's
from cord.
really fuzzy. That's
Mhm.
why we're like, wow, it's kind of fuzzy. Like, nope.
Yeah.
Kind of
Cool. So it's Helosiphon, Hatto, hairy shoelace. Next up, we have Ascophyllum. Pretty darn shallow. I don't think this shows up where we are too often. It's the thing that looks like fucus but is longer. Ribless blades. That's a distinguishing feature. We have a little bit of fucus here, and so you can see that there is a blade on fucus. It's also quite a bit longer. Here's fucus, sharp, stubby little thing. Sometimes it's knobby like Ascophyllum, but also intertidal generally. Sometimes a shallow subtidal. I think most often we found this as stuff that's been torn off of the intertidal and kind of rolled its way down into the subtidal. In that case, we don't count it if it's not attached.
So is the code FB booty or is it FUSP? here, there's this bus.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, this one's for species, so.
What do you want to do about that, Jarrett?
All right.
On our page, we have it listed as FUSP instead of FUDI. Do we just not feel confident we can get it to species? I feel like that's a pretty easy one.
Yeah.
Well, the air bladders thing is a distinguishing characteristic of Disticus. So Disticus has no air bladder, Fucus vesiculosis has air bladder. Much more common.
Yeah. Yeah, we can split them. We honestly kind of do this in the data set. There's like months
Yeah.
that I found because we're usually too deep for it.
Yeah. It's definitely subtitled, but it's not like 30.
Okay. So I feel like FUSP is probably a better way to go, but it'll be rare.
Yeah, it's in fact
There are a bunch of other species too.
Yeah. Okay. This one's fun. Pulpomenia, sweet potato. These squishy little blobs that are not as satisfying to squish as you think they're going to be underwater, but they're pretty cool.
we have no fucus in our data set.
Okay.
So
Mhm.
it's okay.
Yep. Sweet potato. See, cauliflower is next. It's kind of gross looking. Not as charismatic as the sweet potato, but pretty cool also. Lima. I don't think we see a ton of this out there. This one is not even less fun to squish than the sweet potato is. I don't really condone harassing all of the algae out there, but
Well, Pulpomenia is not native here.
go ahead and squish it. Cool. Mm-hmm. Desmorestia, stinkweed. Okay, so we get this one confused a lot with Desmorestia aculeata. Once again, the thing I've been trying to drive home is look at the branching. This is how you tell these apart. Symmetrical branching is Devi. Alternate branching is aculeata. You can remember that because of the A's in their species name. Aculeata is alternating. These guys can get kind of haggard looking at the end of the summer, but we tend to see this more frequently early on when the water is a bit cooler still.
So when you say symmetrical branching, you mean it's coming out of the same spot on each side?
Yeah.
We call that dichotomy.
Yeah.
That's creepy dichotomy.
Use your great phycology words if you have them, but otherwise, yeah, symmetrical. Alternate branching is aculeata. So stinkweed versus sourweed. Generally seen later in the season and looking like this one with most of the little hairs torn off. It's a little bit thicker and coarser, but I don't love that as a distinguishing feature. So just look at where the branches are coming off. I'll be interested to see if this one starts taking over earlier when water gets warmer, if it's sort of a temperature competition sort of thing. But we do see quite a lot of the Desmorestias out there. All right, just a few more greens left. This one, I know it's a bad invasive, but I like it a lot. Codium, dead man's fingers. It is nice and squishy. Branched, easy to distinguish. Sometimes it can be quite a bit darker in color than these, but you should know that one by now. Filamentous green. It's filamentous and green.
Yes, this is one where we have like a couple of filamentous greens that we split up.
Is it enteromorpha?
There's
enteromorpha.
there are a couple of others in there.
Yeah.
So basically, any filamentous green thing. We went on back and forth on this for a while, and she's convinced me that we're not going to be able to differentiate these, and the taxonomy is also changing so fast that it's not even, at least at the time, it's not worth trying.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you could break it into like branched and unbranched. range. That's the best you could do.
Yeah.
But underwater and bad visibility.
Yeah.
Apparently.
Sometimes it is actually fishing line and not filamentous green. Ovoids, sea lettuces. So we have a stringy tubular one, and then the sheets. These are pretty easy. We don't go beyond ovoid really in their names. We have blady ovoid for UV and tubular ovoid for the tubular one. Tubular one is actually 2 layers thick, isn't it? Because I think it's a tube.
Well, they're all 2 layers thick, but it's a hollow tube.
Yeah, okay.
They're like 17 species.
Yeah. We don't see a lot of this. It tends to be pretty darn shallow also, yeah. All right, that is it for algae.
I know there are a couple of additional species that we don't have photos of that are found in Rhode Island. So the ones that we have in the data so far are Brunellia americana. So Carla eats some of that. So probably maybe you guys get some more info on Ectocarpus. Yeah, fuzzy brown. Maybe you've seen it not. Just called it. And Champia cardula.
Oh, yeah. Those are all very distinctive.
Yeah, we have not seen that.
Those, so the Champia and Brunellia are summer species in Rhode Island.
Okay.
So I have a feeling that they like them, like you probably not.
Yeah.
See that in this area. Ectocarpus, I for sure.
Yeah, we probably seen it. So we should.
And then Grylophia.
Yeah. Slimy. Anything else that you'd like to throw at us from further south? Things that we may have, because our like this species list has been built over the years, but it's all been from the Harbor Islands north.
Right.
So as either, last year you had a couple, if there were more that the Rhode Island group adds, this year particularly that Jeff is online now, adds in a Long Island Sound site that we raised.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we tried to use species, like to write them down even if they weren't on the list. So
Yeah.
we'll continue to do that.
Yeah, adding these is great. All right, well, here, I'll wrap up the.
Oh, yeah, I don't know. I'm going to break it.
It's about 12:15, so that'll conclude our morning. Let me find the right window. Yeah, so that'll conclude our morning session. We will, hello, color. So we'll stop for now, and then since it's 12:15, let's take an hour break for lunch. We'll come back at 1:15 or so. I will send around a YouTube link for the afternoon session where we're going to be doing sessile invertebrates. And we'll go from there. That should maybe take us an hour or so, and then we'll be done for the day. All right, thanks everyone. We'll head over to lunch, and we'll see you guys online later.